起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位点传师一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
Welcome to everyone who's here this morning. It's a beautiful day in Indianapolis, a little chilly, but not too terribly bad. The birds are singing, the sky's kind of sunny. It's a great day to be here. It's a wonderful Sunday to be here and sharing the process of learning and cultivating the Tao teachings as well. So thanks to all of you who are showing up from wherever you happen to be at the moment. I don't always remember that we have a variety of time zones, so if where you are is afternoon or evening, good afternoon or evening. Last week we chatted about unattached actions and how that kind of works. Another big topic in cultivating the Tao teachings is in dealing with adversity, dealing with the things that happen to us that from time to time cause us stress and anguish and kind of get in the way of our day. And so I thought today we'd take a look at dealing with matrix or dealing with adversity from a somewhat more Tao-centric perspective. So for starters, we all know that adversity is a part of life, right? It just happens upon us from time to time, or at least that's most people's perception of what occurs. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it. It's I have the matrix here as bullet point number 1 under that, because there's a scene in the movie where Agent Smith, for those of you who have seen the Matrix, is interrogating Morpheus, and he begins to describe how the Matrix came into being. He tells Morpheus, one of the heroes in the movie, that the first Matrix, this first illusory system to keep human beings inert and placated, was supposed to be a human utopia, a perfect and flawless society, and that it was a disaster because the people who were plugged into it couldn't accept the programming. And he makes the statement that he believes human beings define themselves through their own misery and suffering, adversity, to be specific. And so subsequent versions of the Matrix were designed to most closely replicate the end of the 20th century. Kind of what he referred to as the pinnacle of our achievement. I certainly hope the pinnacle of our achievement is somewhat better than that, but it made for a good theater. I personally don't believe that we are defined by misery and suffering, but certainly most people, I think, would agree that a certain amount of misery and suffering, a certain amount of adversity is just part of living. So what is it? Is it fate? Is it our karma? Is it our destiny? Is it a choice? Well, we're going to explore those things this morning, because how we look at the untoward events that occur in our lives actually is important. And getting to a state where we're able to deal with adversity in a more tranquil, wise, and less flusterable manner is an important part of the Tao teaching. So what really is adversity when we stop and think about it? Is it the events that make us unhappy? Is it a punishment for our past sins, or perhaps maybe the price of our karma? Well, to a certain degree, it may be all of those things. Perhaps not. I think very often adversity finds its way into our lives through our own choices, our own decisions, our own responses to the things that happen in life. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all fall short from time to time. Sometimes we do things we know we ought not to do deliberately and on purpose. Hopefully we grow past that one day, but some folks actually do not. And all of those things, the actions of others, the actions of fate, if you will, and our own choices and decisions can bring about that bit of unpleasantness into our lives. Is it a pessimistic viewpoint? No, but a pessimistic viewpoint can lead to more adversity in a life, right? For the individual who always sees the cup as half empty, there's always something lacking. So, as we talk about dealing with adversity and dealing with the things that happen to us in life, it's not uncommon to hear Derek or I or any number of other people say that these things are lessons. They're events that teach us to live a better life by showing us how not to do it, right? In my own life, as I learned to apply the teachings and get closer to what Lao Tzu wrote and to what Derek and the ordained masters teach, I find that the closer I get to being able to apply the teachings correctly, the less adversity I actually encounter. And we say that the good person can be the teacher of the evil person, and the evil person, in fact, can be the teacher of the good, both in different ways without a doubt, but absolutely they can be. Lao Tzu speaks to this point in part, starting in chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching. I'm only copying the first 2 lines of the chapter because they deal directly with the concept I'd like to touch on, but there's much more there, and I encourage you all to read that. It's available in translated form. Thank you to Derek and Skylight Publishing on the TrueTao.org website. The first 2 lines say that when the world knows beautiness, ugliness arises. When it knows good, evil arises. It is a very common trait in the West to look at those terms as polar opposites, just as we tend to do very frequently with yin and yang, right? We view those things as being opposed to one another, one side pushing the other, neither side advancing very much. In point of fact, those things are complementary pairs. And a complementary pair isn't so much in opposition as it is in a state of flow. If you think, for instance, about good and evil, or beauty and ugliness, or perhaps even more simply, if you just take a coin out of your pocket and look at it, one side of the coin has heads on it, the other side has tails, but they're not separate and distinct. They're not in opposition. They're actually both a part of exactly the same coin. They cannot be separated. Adversity in life is very much like that. We look at the complementary pairs of good and evil and beauty and ugliness and being and non-being. Well, for adversity there is ease or comfort or the absence of misery and suffering, a joyful life. Call it whatever you will. And adversity, the things that happen where the outcomes are not as we anticipated. Once again, those things aren't in complete polar opposition. One isn't pushing the other, and neither of them really supplants the other completely, but rather it's a flow. And we reference that in a plethora of ways. When we talk about the wheel of samsara, for instance, we say that that wheel always turns, it always spins. Sometimes we're all fortunate enough to be at the top of the wheel. We have the world on a plate, life's great, everything's wonderful. And sometimes we're at the bottom. And when we're at the bottom, things are anything but great, right? But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we're either somewhere off the bottom going up or somewhere off the top coming down. It's a continual cycle, unending and immutable. It can't be stopped for anything. And so as we look at the state of adversity and easy, tranquil, peaceful, joyful life as perhaps a complementary pair instead of a battle, instead of something to strive and push against, we can begin to understand the things that cause it. And more often than not, I find, and once again, I'm speaking for myself, you can accept or reject this or not, whatever you choose. But for me, I find that most of the problems I wind up in, I actually get myself into through my own decisions, my own choices, the things that I do, the decisions that I make, the things that I feel. Okay? We talk about avoiding extremes of emotion and avoiding extremes of actions, avoiding extremes in general, moderating all things. And yet I have to be the first person to admit to you that in certain things I have tremendous attachments and a terribly vested interest in the outcome of certain situations. I do. And there are a few of them I think that are real easy to relate to. You know, for instance, in my marriage, I expect to be able to trust my wife. I expect her to remain faithful to the marriage as I do. I expect her not to lie to me. I don't lie to her. I have a huge attachment to that. That's something that I count on. I rely on it. Further, I count on her to know when to tell me when to shut up. I don't always I don't always pick up on that as well as she does sometimes. And so I count on her very heavily to be both the voice of my conscience and sometimes the voice of social moderation, if you will. Those things come with a tremendous emotional attachment for me. I don't want to control my wife. I don't want to hold power over her. I don't want to make her live the way that I think she ought to live. Those things aren't the point. The point is I don't want to get hurt. And I have a huge emotional investment in not getting hurt that way. I think a lot of us probably do. But those emotional attachments, no matter how noble, no matter how well-meaning, are still extremes of emotion, and they can still lead to problems. Now, being aware of that, I do the very best that I can to think with my reasoning mind and not with my ego self when it comes to those sorts of questions and issues. Okay? That's what allows me to bring out the gentler, more tranquil, wiser, and more moderated self that should rule me in cases where I'm dealing with my family, right? Otherwise, failing to do that, it could become an autocracy in my own home, a dictatorship, with me playing the role of the dictator, and I don't want that to be the case. Any kind of extreme emotional attachment puts us squarely in that situation, whether it's at home or at work, in our social interactions, okay, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. So adversity in those cases becomes a direct result of our choices. Something happens and we respond badly and then we get to live with the consequences. Contention is another one, where if we're not careful about picking the battles we decide to fight, we wind up in an awful lot of trouble. When we choose to argue, to debate, to impose our will on another, or to set an agenda for the need to be right, we are instantaneously putting ourselves in a position of tremendous mental and emotional peril. In adopting a confrontational stance with anyone, we invite upon ourselves the ill will and bad feelings and anger and all the other negative emotions of the people that we're confrontational with. This is not an easy thing to master. We all have an innate instinctive set of emotions that flare at the most inopportune moments because we feel the need to be right or to be heard or not to be slighted in some way. And once again, those are things to be severely moderated so that we avoid the adversity that springs from them. The illusions of power and control are 100-pound weights around our ankles while we're in the 12-foot end of the swimming pool. I don't personally happen to know anyone who's taller than 12 feet, so that mental picture works for me. They will pull us down and drown us every time. And yet in the moment where we are imposing our will to have power over or control over a situation or another person, we have chosen the adversity that comes with it. Even if we are completely factually correct, anytime we leverage another person's will, we have not won over their confidence, trust, and goodwill, but we've alienated them and pushed them away from us, sometimes irreparably. Our perception of right and wrong is ours. It doesn't have to be everybody else's. And if once again we impose our will upon others, we are bringing upon us adversity. Now, so far I'm talking about this in the context of interpersonal relations, but the consequences for these behaviors reach far beyond the relationships that we damage and the people that we hurt in those extreme states. If I take this set of emotional extremes, these ego-driven needs and desires out of my home and put them in my workplace, this list of emotional and behavioral extremes is a recipe for becoming jobless in a real hurry. And these days, becoming unemployed is a really good way to wind up living on a street corner somewhere. The economy is not what it used to be. And I'm very keenly aware that there are probably, every bit of 500 to 1,000 other guys standing outside the front door of Simon Properties wanting to do the job that I do for them. That's true for most of us. No matter how highly specialized and educated we are, there's always someone waiting to do that job. And so in a very real way, what we say, what we think, what we do, what we believe has an impact or can have an impact, both positively and negatively, on our lives really close to home. And the farther away from home we get, the larger the impact becomes. When we're dealing with people who know us real well, then they can attribute maybe an instance or two of those sorts of behaviors to having an off day or some kind of life trauma or some kind of a catastrophic event. But for those who don't know us, all of a sudden we bought ourselves a label of being argumentative and confrontational and intimidating. And that perception, particularly if it's a first impression, is not something we want to carry with us for any amount of time. It's very, very hard to get out from underneath and really easy to create. So how we choose to deal with the adverse situations that come up in our lives says a lot about us, and it has a huge impact on where we wind up when we're done dealing with those less than pleasantries that we all have to live through from time to time. As with so many of the Tao teachings, a huge part of successfully dealing with adverse situations has to do with reducing the ego self, giving up the desires and emotional and mental attachments that cause us anxiety and grief and strife and worry. The things that put us in a position where we're ready to become confrontational, argumentative, or fight. We need to find a way to reduce that need to control, the need to have power over others. And like pride, the need to control, the need to have power is insidious. We can find ourselves telling somebody they need to do things our way because we're looking out for them, because we know what's best for them, because we think we know what the right thing is. Okay? That happens between me and my children with some frequency. And in a lot of those cases, I'm absolutely positive that I know what's right for them. I know what's best for them. I believe that's why children have parents. But at the same time, I try to temper those thoughts with picking the battles carefully. If my daughter wants to dye her hair bright blue and cut half of it off for the summer, it's not what I do with mine, but hers will grow back. That's not a fight I want to get into. That little bit of freedom, that ability to express herself as she sees fit without any lasting consequences, like getting a tattoo, for instance, at the age of 11, is not something that I want to have an argument over. You know, if she came to me and said she wanted a tattoo, that's a whole different discussion. But if she turns 18 and decides she wants one, okay, that's a decision I'm prepared to let her make. I'll still have an opinion, but I won't make the decision for her. So we reduce the need to control others, the need to have power over others. And in cases where we're dealing with people that aren't our children, we should ask ourselves every time we get ready to walk into one of those situations whether or not our need to be right, to be heard, to be correct, to impose our will is worth the price we're going to pay for having done it. I've also found that instead of worrying and agonizing over the choices of other people, the decisions that they make, the things that they decide to do, it's easier and much less stressful for me to simply regard their decision as their decision and choose my own appropriate response. I can't be responsible for every decision of every person that I know, no matter how I feel about it, but I can absolutely be responsible for my own. I can't, in good conscience, exert my will over other people and not want to have any friends left anyway. But I can absolutely decide what I will and will not do. And so, as I've spent several years learning to apply this set of teachings, I have attempted to learn to turn my focus inwards instead of outwards. to moderate and control my own choices and my own behavior instead of trying to moderate and control the choices and behaviors of others. The Tao Te Ching says, in part, that to those who are kind to me, I am kind to them. To those who are not kind to me, I am kind to them also. To those who keep faith with me, I keep faith with them. To those who do not keep faith with me, I keep faith with them also. That's a fairly straightforward and clear-cut indication of the path we should take when we're considering attempting to exert our influence, our will, our choices on other people and over situations. If a person makes a decision we don't like, or something that we don't feel we should be a part of, that's our choice. But we can do that without creating contention, conflict, and strife, just as Lao-Tzu suggests. We can also adopt a different point of view. And I'll say this now because when we're in the middle of a situation that's causing us a lot of grief and anxiety, it's very, very difficult to remember that this is the time when you need those teachings the most. You know, every time I find myself in a really difficult spot, it seems to be extremely difficult for me to get down to the root of the teachings from time to time. And so I find it much easier to remind myself frequently when I'm not stressed out. Yeah, okay. So what's the different point of view? Well, a bit of suffering and adversity is the other side of ease and happiness and tranquility. It just plain is. Even when we have mastered the Tao teachings, even when we know all there is to know and we're all fully awakened Buddhas one day, there's still going to be something that comes along that we didn't expect. And we're still going to have to respond to it. This isn't one of those sets of teachings that you master and then the lessons all go away. As long as we deal with other people, the lessons are always going to be there. So, right, we just have to recognize it's going to happen. We start life unable to control our emotional reactions and responses when we're confronted by adversity. But as we cultivate the Tao teachings, we have to grow past those completely emotional, irrational responses to a much more moderate way of thinking and doing. If we don't do that, if we can't get past those purely ego-driven responses to the things that we don't expect in life, then we can't grow. We have to be able to supplant the ego self to reason. But at the same time I say that, being moderate, being cautious and controlled does not mean having to be taken advantage of. It just doesn't. So what do we do? Well, in all of those situations, including if we feel we're being taken advantage of, first we take a step back, take a deep breath, think. Before anybody says or does anything, just simply take a step back. When we do that, when we look at the bigger picture, when we begin to understand the situation as it really is, then those adverse situations really don't often turn out to be as bad as we tend to think at first. Everything's a crisis or a disaster from an emotional point of view, but not everything realistically turns out to be one. That and other people have a truly uncanny ability to push our buttons, to find the things that make us upset or cause for us to become confrontational. It's just part of the human condition. it's incumbent upon us to try not to respond to others with that first knee-jerk thought or action or statement that comes to mind. When we take that step back and look at the bigger picture, then we can moderate that initial response with something a little more reasonable. We always have the ability to remove ourselves from those situations that we find to be untenable or unmanageable or really problematic for us at that point without causing a lot of strife and ill will and problems with other people. That's always an option. You know, you guys can go do whatever you want. However, I'm going to do this. And very simple. And in fact, I believe that would be the action of the Tao sage. You know, you give the other folks enough room to be themselves, but you don't have to compromise your own limits and your own boundaries. That's what I mean by not having to be taken advantage of. Being a cultivator of the Tao teachings does not mean we're obligated to be a doormat. It means that we can have limits and boundaries to what we will do and what we won't do, what we will and won't tolerate. But we don't have to be obnoxious about it. And in that way, perhaps, we can diffuse and avoid the problems that come along with our reactions to most of those situations. So, kind of to tie it up, you know, we all have to endure a certain amount of adversity from time to time. That's just a part of life. But we're not obligated to allow the adversities in our lives to define us or to control our behaviors. It's part of Tao cultivation to grow past the point of being manipulated by everything that comes down the road at us, to the point where we choose what comes down the road at us. Second of all, looking at adversity just like looking at any other situation from a more positive point of view is kind of the first step to dealing with it in a more positive, more tranquil, less stressful manner. And I've been doing this for a while now. I can tell you that it works. The amount of stress that I feel day to day in dealing with some of life's more difficult little situations has been greatly diminished simply by not insisting that everybody be reasonable and do it my way. Lastly, in all things, moderation is absolutely the key. We have to moderate our words, moderate our responses, moderate our behaviors. We have to let the extreme emotions and reactions subside, and then make a wise choice about what to do with those situations that are more or less adverse for us. Sure, there are always going to be some adverse situations that are going to be bigger than others. The death of someone close to you, for instance, is a highly emotional event, and I don't think that the grief and emotions that go along with that are inappropriate. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, what we see as being a crisis or a disaster or a calamity is simply no more than just a part of living, something that can be gotten through with the same grace and aplomb that one would in a normal day-to-day relationship. I think understanding that is another step towards becoming a Tao sage. Thank you all very much, and I hope some of that was useful.